Welcome back, everybody. Here we are. So we just finished the fives in the last video. So let us move those out of the way. Again, we're working with the Vajra suit and the suit of swords in Robert in Place's other decks. And again, I just feel that it's important to see his other work for context, in addition to seeing his work in the Buddha Tarot, right? So we've got another, just move it there so we can see it properly. We've got another set of cards to look at here where there's a clear theme, right? The Six of Swords is something most of us are familiar with in terms of the theme of the boat. In the Rider-Waite-Smith, of course, the ship it's more of a rowboat rather than a ship with a sail on it. And it's got the boatman, and the person has swords all around them that are embedded in the ship moving forward. Here we see something different, something very different. So in, for example, the Alchemical Tarot, we can see that, you know, all of the swords are pointing the same direction that the boat is going in. You know, the wind, the gift of the wind, the blessing of the wind, which he refers to as the anima mundi, is giving the ship its ability to carry on and move forward, right? So there's a blessing involved. There's a sense of safety that's involved. There's a sense of balance between air and water that's involved here. So heart-mind connotations come into play there. You know, it's a very clear message, right, in that card. The seven, the six, I don't know why I keep wanting to say seven. It's the Tarot of the Sevenfold Mystery. It's again very clear here. He replaces the cloud in the sky with the eye on the boat, you know, as the sort of, it knows where to go, it knows how to flow, etc. Okay, and then when we get it distilled down into the Six of Swords in the Alchemical Magnum Opus, it's interesting because we have the return of the boatman. And similarly, when we look at the Tarot de Marseille, we've got the return of the wind, or the anima mundi, you know, blowing the sails, okay, moving things forward. So very interesting the way he does that. Now, again, what does that mean here, right? We're just seeing an umbrella or a parasol that's really ornate and very pretty. But what does that have to do with, you know, with the, and this confused me, all right? I'm letting you know, just to be transparent. When I first saw this deck, I did not get it immediately because A, it was really expensive, and B, it confused the hell out of me with the pips. I just thought, okay, that's nice, but I have no idea what you're doing here. Which is why, you know, a study of his other work, along with some understanding of what his perspective is on the cards and the kind of depth that they really contain, is necessary, right? It really is, because there is great depth in here, but it's not immediately obvious. What he does is he writes about it really beautifully, and then he distills it down into a very simplistic image. So what is that simplistic image? He writes, regarding the Six of Vadras, he writes, the precious umbrella is one of the 8 glorious emblems that were given to Siddhartha by the gods. Now that's a very interesting way to view it, because the idea of gods in Buddhism is kind of it's a little contentious, right? So we'll stay with this, right? The precious umbrella was one that was given at the time of his birth. In ancient India, it was a symbol of royalty. Servants would hold the umbrella over Siddhartha to protect him from sun and rain, and one of his titles was Lord of the White Umbrella. Some icons of Siddhartha's life include the umbrella being held over him. For several hundred years after the Buddha's death, he was not depicted in art. Now take that one in for just a minute here, folks. For several hundred years after his death, the Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, the one that we're now familiar with from all of the statuary and imagery that exists everywhere, he was not depicted in statues. None of those things existed. Those are all very, very much later. They came about because, in short, Buddhism had multiple councils, right, where all of the remaining Buddhists, who were still practicing, would get together and talk through what was happening. In one of those, at one of those councils, it was the third one, held by Ashoka, the Indian emperor. Essentially, everybody split, right? Ashoka chose one sect of Buddhism or one style over every other. And so the other two sects who were a little offended and upset left and went far and wide. And one of those sects went way far north and west of India. So they went into the area that is now Kashmir, Afghanistan, etc., into the Bamiyan Valley, where the Buddha's the Buddha statues were shot and destroyed by the Taliban. They went into that area, and who else was there at around that time, funnily enough, was Alexander the Great and the Greeks. So the reason we can thank the Greeks for any for the birth of statuary and the use of statuary that then spread over into China, along the Silk Road, and over to Japan and Korea and so forth. That started because of contact with the West. Okay? Kind of cool, right? So when you see this umbrella, at one time, the umbrella by itself was intended to represent the Buddha. Okay? What is an umbrella? An umbrella is a refuge. It's a refuge to protect us. All right? So, let's see. Yeah, so let's go back to the book. So he wasn't depicted in art. Instead, objects like the umbrella were depicted as symbols of his presence. All right. So what does it represent? It denotes protection from harm, illness, and obstacles. This protection comes from a higher power. We should go with the flow. The precious umbrella of Buddha was said to protect him from all evil and to offer shade from the heat of evil desires. So if you are someone who is, a Buddhist and not into the idea of gods and demons and deities and so forth, which is completely understandable, that is certainly where I started out, we might even just say simply that the umbrella represents, protection in the form of our own Buddha nature. So by taking refuge in the Buddha who's inside of us, right, we could say it results, or rather it rests inside of us, it rests under the umbrella, right, under the umbrella of self. We can take refuge there knowing that we have innate goodness, okay? But either way, we're looking at refuge, safety, and protection. Similarly, similar to what we see here with these swords, right, and with the boats. Now, let's just see what that actual difference really is, because I think that's important too. This card represents the easy well-being we experience when we go with the flow and let the soul of the world guide us. It may represent intuitive guidance that lets our minds take a rest. It also represents trust in a higher power, almost word for word verbatim, right? It can be a great relief when we can admit that we are not solely responsible for our fates and that there is an intelligent, loving presence guiding us. So that would also just be, the idea of emptiness, the idea of, something beyond just the self that we encounter with, in everyday life, right? I have a teacher that refers to self as, and our sort of this concept we have of being a separate self from one another, which is a pretty important concept in Buddhism, right? Something to take in mind when we look at the Buddha Tarot. He calls it the claustrophobia of self-referentiality, right? You know, when you get so stuck in your own head that you can't quite get out, this card, right, whether it's the Six of Vadras or any of these, really represents that. You know, it's the ability to get out of the unconscious mind, or, you know, the claustrophobia of our idea of a separate self, because we can understand ourselves as part of a greater whole that's bigger than we are. Okay. So, yeah, so that's the Six of Swords. Let us go ahead and move on. So we'll move on to the Seven of Swords. This is not too far off from what we already know from RWS, okay? So fear not, friends. Fear not. You know, the Seven of Swords is not greatly far away from that. Certainly, I feel like we're definitely referencing it here. So what we're seeing here, you know, is we've got the fox. So what does a fox do? The fox is sneaky, right? The fox is real sneaky. He steals money. Here he's stealing one of the swords. He's stealing an idea, you know, a thought, words. This could be plagiarism. We have it distilled down here in these two, although I do love that bird. Where's my... A sly fox contemplates a bird, cleverness, cunning, trickery, or dishonesty. Right? So the fox is looking at that bird. The bird isn't sure what to think. The fox is thinking, how can I sneak in and maybe get that? You know, who knows? But it definitely references dishonesty. Now, what does it say? What does he say about the other cards, right? He says... In keeping with the theme of a trickster hero, the Alchemical Tarot's Seven of Swords depicts a fox, an animal that earned its reputation for cunning and trickery because of his depiction in Aesop's fables. On this card, the fox has been gathering swords for his stash. He's coming over a hill with his 7th trophy. Is he building an arsenal or just a collection? Did he steal the swords or just find them? His swords face various directions. Some are facing left or right, not in a positive or a negative way. Some downward negative ones are safely stuck into the ground, right? So the downward negative ones are, you know, kept safe from us. But they're all kind of going in various directions. You know, again, I mean, if this were a writer and that card came up, I would tell them, seriously, look at plagiarism. No joke. Okay, what else do we have? The fox also appears on this card in the Tarot of the Sevenfold Mystery, right? This guy. But here, the allegory is more evolved. There are 7 swords ascending into the sky with handles representing the colors on the spectrum and the mystical ascent. Above the swords, there is a dove. On the ground below, the fox offers a coin with an image of a dove to the real dove. The fox is the trickster in one's mind. He is confusing money with wealth, a map with the land, aggression with defense, and revenge with justice. And he does go on to say that either of these cards, may represent confusion, trickery, or outright dishonesty and theft. In some situations, however, dishonesty is called for, and the fox may be a hero. All right? So I think that's an interesting one to consider as we look at what he's done with the Seven of Vadras, all right? There is the space within, just as we have in the West, right, where something like trickery or deception can be used skillfully, right, in terms of finding a way to outsmart, you know, I mean, we have lots of stories and mythologies where an underling outsmarts, you know, an authority figure that needs to be put in its place, right? Here we have the Seven of Vadras, and I think it's really pretty clear that we're looking at a guy who is stealing something from a stash, right? Where there's a storehouse or a warehouse full of stuff. Let me just pull that book out. I've got to swap over the books. Right, so he, let's see, place writes, I hope that's in shot, I think it should be. Place writes, in this scene on this card we see a warehouse with cushions and jewels stored inside. A thief is leaving with a bag of jewels. His suspicious glance gives him away. The card represents dishonesty. All right, so he then goes into talking about the 5 precepts in Buddhism, which is important because they tell us to avoid dishonesty of various kinds. We're told not to steal, not to lie, not to cheat on our spouse. These rules are not for the sake of others. I would say not for the sake of others alone, but for our own sake. These negative actions stem from the false belief that we can prosper from the misfortunes of others. This ignorant behavior separates us from others and does violence to our ability to become one with the world. However, it's not enough to refrain from negative behavior. We must cultivate positive behavior instead. So instead of not stealing, we develop generosity. Instead of not lying, we develop truthfulness. And instead of not cheating, we develop contentment. If dishonest action is not engendered by a negative self-interest, then it does not fall into the same category. Okay, so for example, if we were to steal a weapon from a would-be killer to stop him from killing, this is not a negative action. If the reading is referring to this kind of action, it is describing a heroic act. Look for what is being stolen and why. All right, so it's making great use of Buddhist ethics and combining them with all of the meaning and specificity that we find in his other cards, right? And again, we're still in the realm of mind. We're still looking at turning anger into mirror-like wisdom, because what happens if we think we're being stolen from, lied to, etc.? We become angry. But in order not to be deluded, we have to understand better what is happening, right? Which means you have to take a deep breath, you have to calm the body, and that by itself is alchemical, right? That by itself can be a path of transformation to stop reactivity in its tracks. And it's frequently what's necessary in order to get to the truth. You know, we can't find the truth if we can't see it. And we cannot see it when the mind is clouded by fears, by past actions that have been taken against us or someone else we know and love, etc., through assumptions, you know, through ideas that are unchecked. So, you know, to turn that into miracle-like wisdom and see that perhaps something is being done here that might be heroic requires, you know, a very sound mind. It means stopping the anger and transforming it so that it can be used wisely, you know, to create clarity. Okay, I hope that makes sense. I'm even more in love with all of these decks and with his, with Place's view of the world and the way that he pulls all of it together in the form of tarot. The more deeply I study his work, I just love it. I really do. And I've really fallen very much in love with this. So, it's exciting. It's really exciting. So what do we see here? We're seeing a lot of red. Not so much red here, just brown and gold. But we're seeing animalistic. We've got cat faces kind of mixed in here-ish. And then we've got a very ruddy looking man here. All right, so there is definitely anger to be transformed in this card. All right, similarly, we've got a very angry doggy in this Eight of Vadras. Very, very angry doggy who's extremely upset. They're all being imprisoned. right? Or held captive in some form or other, all right? I don't know if it's very clear here. In the Alchemical Tarot, he's chained. So we have the barrier of the swords, but he's also chained and held down. So let's talk about what this beast in this one is first, because here we've got the, clearly that's a cat kind of beast. This is some weird cat man beast kind of happening here. We've got a man and then we've got a dog. So it's important to just look at those symbols and what those are about. So let's talk first about this Alchemical Tarot. So the Eight of Swords are thrust downward into the ground to form the bars of a cage. A mythical creature made of parts from all four of the evangelical beasts. Okay, kind of cool. With a lion's body, a bull's horns, a human-like expression, and eagle's wings. Can we see that? Oops, where am I? Here we are. Yeah. All right, so that's what we've got there. So again, it's lion's body, bull's horns, human-like expression, and eagle's wings. It's held within this cage and chained to a stake so he cannot fly away. Because he's captured and held back, the beast has become red with anger and repressed heat. The beast represents repression, anger, and feelings of alienation or of being cut off from others. All right, he goes further to say, it is our vital life force, our libido, that becomes red and heated when it is repressed by blocks in our psyches. These blocks may happen because of a negative experience that we do not wish to revisit, but they can also be caused by the strengths in our personalities that we rely on, even when they are not the right behavior for the current situation. Think about that. Wow. Yeah, blocks in our psyches. So blocks in our psyches may happen because of a negative experience that we don't want to revisit, but they can also be caused by the strengths in our personalities that we rely on. And those blocks would happen because they're just not the right behavior for the current situation. How about that? Right? That's, again, requires great skill to overcome that in order to turn that anger in this situation into a mirror-like wisdom. To say, okay, stop the anger, stop your frustration, stop feeling pinned in. It doesn't mean you're not strong. It just means that that is not the skillful means with which approaching the current situation is going to be helpful. Okay, so to restore our vitality, this beast needs to be set free in a safe, respectful environment. In some respects, this could be viewed possibly as being triggered. Because when we're triggered, we become imprisoned in some ways in the mind, while the body is becoming incredibly reactive. This is an incredibly physical way to explore the swords, right? In the Sevenfold mystery, he writes that the beast has taken a human form, but he still has pointed ears and fur for hair. He's bound with chains and shackles and surrounded by negative swords. As in the alchemical image, he's red with repressed energy and anger. This card is useful in readings for illustrating a block in psychic energy, but it may simply represent anger or frustration, right? This is the rawest form that we get of anger and frustration, right? And there's his pointed ears and his fur for hair, right? He's human in animal, or animal in human form, or human with animalistic features and so on. And I think we can clearly see how he's illustrating that in the pips, right? So we're distilling these images into this, but we're doing it so that we can just recall them with a flash. Similarly, okay, we're recalling these images into this one in a flash, right? We've got the Eight of Vadras here. Let's just take a quick look at what he writes in here. It's not that long. Actually, this one's longer than some of the other ones. So he writes, on this card, we find a Tibetan dog tethered to a stake. The dog is a Tibetan Spaniel. And there he is, cutie. A small dog with a loud bark that has been bred in Buddhist monasteries since before the 6th century. Supposedly, they were watchdogs. Because the dog's freedom is curtailed, she strains at the end of her leash. One might imagine that if her leash were untied, she would turn around and eat the food in the dish instead of running away. So there's the food. You can see the little dish of food there. She's not straining because she wants to go somewhere else, but because she cannot accept the restriction of her leash. Isn't that fascinating? How often we find things to push against that under different circumstances we might not, right? We might not push so hard to get away from something. Our psychic energy is like this when we restrain it by trying to hold on to past expectations and patterns instead of living in the present. Every situation requires a unique approach. If we were in a relationship and it ended badly, it doesn't mean that all relationships will end badly. If we had an uncomfortable relationship with our parents, it does not mean that all relationships with figures of authority will be uncomfortable. This card represents restraint. And here we go. It may refer to a psychic block. This block may also refer to ideas that we think are positive, but that we are still attached to. The Buddha said, quote, to be attached to a certain view and to look down upon other views as inferior, this the wise call a fetter. Okay, so it's keeping an open mind. He's added to this the idea of keeping an open mind, all right? But it's really about examining your view. What is your view? What is your perspective? And is it really the cause of what's holding you back? Right? Similarly, he talks about, things that are positive qualities that just aren't useful, and the kind of anger that could bring up, the resentment it could bring up, and why it's so necessary to let go of it. I will say, just from a personal perspective kind of situation, so I've said this many times, some of you may be new or haven't heard this before. I used to be a college professor. So I spent most of my career teaching in theater, specifically in physical disciplines, movement, physical theater, etc. I experienced a lot of this in theater, trust me. It's hard because you have ideas and impulses that come up that you can't use because they're not appropriate for a role, or the director just doesn't see it as constructive, to their perspective or their view. At any rate, what I found recently in the last few years since I left is how many things that were strengths in the past as a professor, as a teacher, as a leader, that I've had to let go of because they are not skillful. They're not necessary when I've done other types of work, whether it's being a tarot reader, whether it is being a death doula, whether it's being an assistant, to the chiropractor that I work for, or a patient advisor, or medical advocate, a substitute teacher, a special needs aide. These are all things I've done over the last few years since leaving that job. And so, yeah, I mean, you're going to come up again. I've come up against a lot of those. And I will say, this is a tough one to get past. There's effort involved. It is very alchemical. Oh, Trinley, really, dude? There's the animal when it's unleashed. All right, so moving along, we want to get to the 9s. Now, I will say, as much as I love the 8 of Swords in these decks, in Robert M. Place's view of tarot, I'm a little bit less. I still love his view here. We can see some similarity, right? Those of us who are, You know, we've worked with the RWS. That is, that's pretty immediate. Trini, come on, buddy. Are you going to be stubborn? Yeah. What was I saying? So this is familiar. This looks, I mean, come on. You know, that's a pretty familiar one. It's not really worlds away from what we're accustomed to. So too, neither is this one. No, Trini. Come on, bud. Can you wait until Mommy's finished? Please. He's so naughty. So, so here we go. Cat problems. All right. These are so clear. So clear. And I feel like this is one of the few cards in the deck, so far at least, where I'm not on board as well. All right. This is hard to see as belonging to these. Okay. And it'll be a little challenging as we get to the way he explains it as well. Let's just start. I mean, I don't think we really need to say too much about these. I mean, they're obviously the anxiety, the worry. He does write, let's see. Yeah, let's just take a quick gander. Never hurts. He does say with the Tarot of the Seven, or with this one, let's start here. You know, he's got these dangling swords. You know, and it's funny because his way seems really open, like he can pass through the dangling swords. I'm paraphrasing and just reminding myself of the text, but he's still battling them even though he doesn't need to, right? He could just pass through and do his own thing, but he has chosen somehow to engage with these swords in a way that's unhelpful and unnecessary and potentially dangerous, all right? Yeah, he writes, when we fight with our fears, we make them stronger and more able to do us harm. The best course is to let these thoughts alone and just move forward, okay? So that's where he's coming from here. With the Tarot of the Sevenfold Mystery, it's a little different, right? He's like going under a curtain and he's got his little thread, okay? He's got his little thread. So what is this one saying? He writes, this card in the Tarot of the Sevenfold Mystery depicts a man in the same position. He's facing 10 dangling swords representing his fears, but he's in the act of passing through the swords. Instead of a sword, there is a red string in his hand, suggesting that he's receiving guidance from his higher self, and he's been shown the way through his fears. So he found this thread, and he's following it out. Right? He's picked something up that's helped him move and get out of that situation. It should be said too, the word sutra means thread. Right? I don't know. So you know, when I saw that, I remember initially I got really excited because I was like, oh my gosh, I bet there's going to be some great correlation here. Or there should be in theory with the Nine of Vajras, you know, and the way that comes together. Unfortunately, we're not going to see as much of that. So, unless I've missed something and I'm about to discover it, but I don't believe so. No. So he writes here, a dragon swallows the sun and the moon. A dream of this nature. So we are coming back to the reference of dreams, you know, that we get with the RWS. So there's at least that. A dream or vision of this nature is believed to foretell a serious threat or illness. This card represents fear of the future. In the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha told the story of a man who, when he became drunk at his friend's house, fell into a deep sleep. While he was asleep, his friend sewed a precious jewel into his clothes as a present to him. The next morning, the man continued on his travels. Eventually, he reached a foreign land where, because of the fear of hunger and cold, he worked as a slave. During the time that he slaved and worked at difficult tasks, he did not realize that he owned a precious jewel that could buy him any comfort. We are all like this man. We fear more than we need to, and therefore make ourselves more uncomfortable than we need to. Work should be constructive, not fearful. Now, that's a great story, but I find it difficult to connect, you know, to this card. it doesn't really help. I don't feel like the story is really, it feels like there's so much detail and information that we're missing somehow that could be helpful or useful. And it almost feels like he squeezed that idea into this card in a way that was, I don't know, just doesn't feel as, it feels forced. It feels forced. So I'm less of a fan of this one. I think what we can take from it, you know, is that we have the idea of the dream. We can connect dreams to it. And the idea of dreaming of a serpent swallowing the sun and moon is a bad, you know, it tells us about something we fear. And that not giving in to fear will allow us greater ability to mobilize, you know, and do what we need to do, right? So not my favorite, and I wish I could do a better job of explaining that one, but I think that's probably the best thing we can take from it, okay? So, moving on to the 10, we're going to see some very familiar imagery, okay? Boop. And boop. There we go. That was skillful, I thought. You know, we get, again, he's using the TDM arrangement, or like one TDM arrangement of the swords, you know, in order to pierce the heart. You know, so we get all of the connotations we're used to in the Ten of Swords, right? He wants to take it a little bit further in his decks by adding to that, the idea, you know, they're all being pierced in the heart, right? It's not so much that they're being stabbed in the back as that something in the heart has been pierced, you know, piercing the mind in the alchemical Magnum Opus. Let's see. I remember there may be some richness in here that we want to pull from the book. Yeah, he says that these two are both based on Pamela Coleman Smith's cards. But in my decks, the man is being stabbed in the chest. On the alchemical card, the man has been stabbed with the 10 swords and lies dying in a pool of his own blood. An open book lies on the ground in the foreground. The number 10 has come back to 1. And in this case, all of the negativity, symbolized by the downward thrusting swords, has been focused on one person, right? Killing, criticism expressed in words or even deeds have created emotional or physical pain. So he's seeing this as criticism, okay? Verbal criticism. And the book suggests the possibility of censorship, right? The person being able to speak or write their own language, speak their own words. They've been, you know, because we're dealing with swords, right? Swords, air, words, verbal, air, etc. I think I said air a couple times here. Let's see. This card may also symbolize illness, in which case it's the body that's betrayed you. The only positive in this card is that the worst has happened and now you can heal. Right? It may also imply, I like this because it comes back to this idea of alchemy and transformation, right? Which is the Vajra, it's the essence of the Vajrayana. He says it may also imply that healing can only happen when you get in touch with the pain that you have been repressing. For this reason, this card often turns up when we ask for advice from the higher self. This card is like a blues song. Although the emotions are painful, it can be good to let them out. Okay, and so we're looking at basically the same concept here in the Sevenfold Mystery, but we're not, you know, we don't have the book reference and so on. We, you know, yada yada. So 10 of Vadras, again, very different, very different. You know, we've got this person, and we've got this bizarre-looking Naga being, and we've got the 10 swords, or Vajras, and he's pointing to the Vajras. So we have a 10-headed demon curses a man. Demons of this nature bring illness and misfortune. So anybody who watched any of the Mo divination videos that I was making all through last year, you will recall them mentioning this, right? This is very, very much a part of the Tibetan landscape and the Tibetan psychological landscape too, and spiritual landscape, is this concept of demons. In Tibetan medicine, diseases are commonly attributed to demons that arise from the environment. That's a very interesting way to look at it. Okay, I'm gonna not use the most contentious form we have of this, but let's just think about monkeypox for a second, right? That is a zoonosis, right, or a zoonotic disease that comes from animals, or it comes from the environment. It comes from the land, from the beings of the land. Right. So there is some connection. There's some wisdom there. As some of these environmental demons are associated with certain occupations in the workplace, and others are unforeseen forces of nature, we might think of them as pollutants and allergens. However, the Tibetan doctor is able to cure their effects through ritual. This card represents misfortune that has come to us apparently through no fault of our own. So, it's the idea of something that comes from, somewhere, but which is not necessarily a result of our own actions. Okay, it's just, bad luck, or it's the demons in the landscape and the environment, but it's not something we did. Buddha's teaching is the ultimate cure. When we've attained wisdom and clarity of mind, all demons depart, because all demons are born of our hopes and fears. Everything in the world is ultimately connected to our minds. So I feel deeply that he actually drew more here upon Buddhist wisdom and concept than upon his own alchemical, structure that he's worked with. So this is just one of those cards where, I don't feel that these are, not connected, but they're really specific. He's really specific with these, talking about swords, words, language, things that stab us in the heart and leave us feeling, completely distressed. It feels like this is still within the confines of what I was calling earlier the claustrophobia of self-referentiality. Okay, this is still something that we can point back to somewhere in our lives. We can place the responsibility or the blame on someone else, etc. What I think is fascinating is that here he is saying something more transcendent. Okay, so rather than, if we come back again to the idea of transforming anger into mirror-like wisdom, rather than becoming angry with whatever the circumstance was that created the difficulty, if we can simply recognize it's okay, it's not personal. We can transform it, because the nature of what's happening is not personal, right? Disease is not personal. I'm just thinking about the fact that, we're filming this in June 2022. Monkeypox is ravaging and terrifying the LGBTQ plus community, especially the male identified members, right? Because it's in that community worldwide. It is not personal. It's not personal. It's not you. It's not something you did. It's just something that happened. So take the sting of the self-referentiality out of it. You couldn't have created it. You couldn't have known going in that it would happen, right? Likewise, when something bad happens in the world, we often, or to us, we think, why is this bad thing happening to me? Well, maybe it's not really about us. Maybe it's not about you. Again, the claustrophobia that comes up from self-referentiality in something that is way beyond anything to do with us personally. It's something we can let go of. So, it may as well be from a demon of the land. It may as well be from something that was laid into or set into motion, set into being, through no fault of our own, right? And, there is a way to heal it. And the first step in healing it is to transform any anger associated with it into the wisdom of understanding it just isn't personal. It just is what it is. That's the mirror. Okay? And with that, my friends, I leave you, and I will be back. I think having the structure of just being able to go through the pips like this so that we can expose their depth is a useful thing. I'm curious to hear your insights, but I think we'll next move on to the Ratna family. So we'll move on to the jewels, the jewel family. Here's our point of reference. At some point, this will be a book. But we're going from the Vajra family to the southern. If we go north with it, that's probably more helpful. Everything always starts east, so you orient yourself east. So that's why that's on top. But we'll go south to the Ratna family, or the jewel family. It's earth. And we'll start with the ace to 5. We'll go through 6 to 10 again. And when we've been through all 4, we'll come back and we'll just look at quartz and the structure of the quartz, okay? So, see you next time. Bye.